The loneliest place in the world is not an empty house. It is a crowded airport where everyone has somewhere to go except you. Close to 1 o'clock in the morning, Terminal 5 at Chicago O'Hare International Airport had begun to grow unusually quiet. The endless rush of travelers had faded into scattered footsteps, distant rolling suitcases, and the occasional boarding announcement echoing through the nearly empty concourse. Bright overhead lights reflected across polished floors that looked almost untouched after one of the busiest travel days of the week. Coffee shops were pulling down their metal shutters. Airport employees were finishing overnight cleaning routes, and exhausted passengers searched for the last available seats before their delayed flights finally departed. On a lonely row of gray airport chairs near gate M18, Ava Brooks sat hugging a faded backpack against her chest. Her phone screen had gone completely dark nearly an hour earlier after the battery finally died. Beside her rested a small paper cup that had once held hot coffee but was now completely empty. She had been stretching every dollar for weeks, carefully planning a trip she believed would become one of the happiest memories of her life. Instead, she found herself staring silently through the enormous terminal windows at airplanes disappearing one after another into the dark Chicago sky. She had not cried for almost 20 minutes. There were simply no tears left. Her boyfriend had boarded the evening flight without her, taking both the confirmed reservation and the shared luggage after a heated argument she still struggled to understand. By the time she reached the customer service counter, the flight doors had already closed. Airline agents had apologized politely, but there was little they could do until morning. Hotels near the airport were almost fully booked. Rideshare prices had climbed beyond what remained in her bank account. Calling someone for help was impossible with a dead phone and no charger. For the first time in years, Ava felt completely alone in a place surrounded by thousands of strangers. She rested her head against the cold airport wall and closed her eyes, hoping that sleep might arrive before fear did. Several travelers walked past without noticing her. A janitor quietly pushed a floor cleaning machine across the terminal. Somewhere in the distance, another boarding announcement invited passengers to a late-night departure heading toward Seattle. Time seemed to move more slowly with every passing minute. Then a pair of polished black dress shoes stopped a few feet in front of her. Ava looked up. A tall man wearing a long black overcoat stood holding nothing more than a small leather travel bag. He appeared to be in his late 30s, composed, well-dressed, and unusually calm for someone traveling so late at night. His face carried quiet confidence rather than curiosity. He did not stare. He did not judge. He simply noticed what everyone else had walked past. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. The airport around them continued moving as though nothing unusual had happened. Finally, the man glanced toward the nearly empty departure board before returning his attention to Ava. His voice was low, steady, and unexpectedly kind. "Why are you still here?" Ava looked down at the worn backpack in her arms before answering with a tired smile that barely reached her eyes. "Because everyone else left." The man remained silent for a second longer, studying neither her appearance nor her clothes, only the quiet sadness she could no longer hide. Then, without introducing himself or asking another personal question, he spoke words that would quietly change both of their lives before sunrise. "Come on," he said gently. "Let me help you get home." 1 week earlier, Ava Brooks had believed that careful planning could protect a dream. At 26 years old, she balanced 2 jobs that rarely left her enough time to rest. 3 mornings each week, she worked as a receptionist at a neighborhood fitness center on the south side of Chicago, greeting members with the same cheerful smile, no matter how tired she felt. In the evenings, she served tables at a family-owned diner where regular customers knew her by name and often asked about the vacation she had been counting down to for months. Every extra shift, every skipped shopping trip, and every homemade dinner instead of takeout had one purpose. She wanted to save enough money to travel with her boyfriend, Ryan Mitchell, on what he kept calling the beginning of their future together. Whenever she talked about the trip, her eyes brightened with quiet excitement. She imagined taking photographs together, exploring a new city, and finally escaping the endless routine that had defined most of her adult life. Ryan always sounded confident whenever they discussed their plans. He insisted on managing the reservations because he claimed he understood travel better than she did. He booked the flights, handled the itinerary, and encouraged Ava to transfer her share of the travel expenses into his account so everything would be easier to organize. She trusted him completely. Trust had always come naturally to Ava. She believed people usually meant what they said, especially those who claimed to love her. Friends occasionally questioned Ryan's habit of making decisions without asking for her opinion, but Ava dismissed those concerns with a smile. She convinced herself that relationships required compromise, and Ryan simply liked taking charge. Looking back later, she would remember dozens of small moments that should have made her pause. Ryan often laughed whenever she suggested checking the booking confirmations herself. He brushed aside simple questions by telling her not to worry so much. If she hesitated before sending more money for hotel upgrades or travel expenses, he reminded her that couples were supposed to trust each other completely. None of those conversations seemed important at the time. They felt like ordinary disagreements between two people preparing for an exciting trip. The morning of their departure began with clear skies and hopeful anticipation. Ava arrived at O'Hare carrying a modest suitcase, a small backpack, and enough excitement to erase weeks of exhaustion. She spotted Ryan near the airline check-in counters, scrolling through his phone with practiced confidence. He greeted her with a quick hug before immediately checking the departure screens. Around them, families embraced, children pointed excitedly toward. Airplanes visible through enormous terminal windows, and travelers hurried through the busy concourse with coffee cups and rolling luggage. Everything felt exactly as Ava had imagined. She believed she was standing at the beginning of a wonderful new chapter. She had no way of knowing that before the night ended, every plan she had built through months of sacrifice would quietly fall apart inside the same airport, where thousands of strangers continued chasing destinations of their own, completely unaware that one young woman was about to discover the painful difference between being accompanied on a journey and truly being valued by the person walking beside her. Across the same airport, another traveler moved through the terminal without attracting the slightest attention. Ethan Park preferred it that way. Although countless people recognized the name printed on annual financial reports and corporate press releases, very few knew what he actually looked like. The privacy was intentional. Publicly, he was the chairman of one of the fastest-growing transportation groups in North America. Behind closed doors, influential executives, politicians, and business leaders understood that his authority extended far beyond ordinary corporate success. Quietly known in elite circles as the Korean Mafia boss, Ethan had built an empire through discipline, loyalty, and absolute discretion. Yet none of those titles mattered tonight. Dressed in a simple black overcoat over a tailored charcoal suit, carrying only a small leather travel bag, he looked like any other successful businessman returning from a long day of meetings. He had dismissed his security team earlier that evening, insisting on traveling alone whenever possible. Solitude allowed him to observe people honestly. No rehearsed greetings. No carefully staged customer service. No executives rushing ahead to hide problems before he could notice them. Every few months, Ethan quietly visited one of the companies within his organization without announcing his arrival. He believed the only way to understand an organization was to experience it exactly as ordinary people did. Airports fascinated him most because they revealed human character under pressure. Delayed flights tested patience. Missed connections exposed weaknesses in procedures. Employees who believed no executive was watching often revealed how much they truly cared about the people standing in front of them. Tonight's visit had been intended as another routine inspection before flying home. Instead, weather delays had grounded several departures, leaving thousands of travelers scattered throughout the terminals. Ethan spent hours walking through different concourses, stopping occasionally to watch airline employees assist families, elderly passengers, and confused visitors trying to navigate unexpected schedule changes. He noticed the workers who smiled despite their exhaustion. He also noticed those who treated inconvenience as though it belonged only to the passengers. Every observation quietly settled into memory. He rarely corrected mistakes immediately. He preferred understanding patterns before making decisions that could affect entire departments. As midnight approached, Ethan considered leaving the airport altogether. His driver had already informed him that the car was waiting outside. Yet something made him continue walking through Terminal 5 one last time. Perhaps it was instinct. Perhaps it was simple curiosity. Then, near gate M18, he noticed a young woman sitting completely alone beneath the glowing departure board. She was not scrolling through a phone or reading a book like other delayed passengers. Instead, she held a worn backpack tightly against her chest while staring through the massive windows at airplanes disappearing into the darkness. Several people walked past her without slowing down. Airline employees hurried toward overnight assignments. Cleaning crews polished the already spotless floor. No one seemed to realize that loneliness could be just as visible as any piece of forgotten luggage. Ethan stopped several steps away without speaking. He had learned long ago that genuine kindness often began with quiet observation rather than immediate questions. There was dignity in allowing someone a moment before offering help. As he watched the young woman lower her tired eyes toward the empty coffee cup beside her, he sensed that whatever had happened this evening had little to do with delayed flights and everything to do with disappointment. For reasons he could not yet explain, he decided that walking away would be the only mistake he would regret before the night was over. Ava did not answer the stranger immediately. Years of being told to be careful around unfamiliar people made hesitation feel like common sense, even when kindness stood quietly in front of her. She looked toward the nearly empty terminal, hoping someone else might appear with another solution. But the airport had settled into the slow rhythm that only existed after midnight. A cleaning crew disappeared around the corner. The customer service desk had already closed for the night. The departure board continued refreshing flights that no longer mattered to her. She drew a slow breath before speaking. "I appreciate it, but I do not even know your name." The man offered a faint smile that carried neither offense nor pressure. "Ethan," he replied simply. "And you?" "Ava." He nodded politely, as though her name deserved the same respect as any executive he had ever met. "Have you eaten tonight, Ava?" She almost answered yes out of habit, but the truth arrived before the words could. "Not since this afternoon." Ethan glanced toward the last restaurant still serving customers on the opposite side of the concourse. Warm lights spilled through its glass windows, while only a handful of travelers remained inside. "Then dinner comes first," he said. "Everything else can wait until afterward." Ava hesitated once more before quietly following him across the terminal. The restaurant manager welcomed Ethan with the same professional greeting offered to every guest, completely unaware of who he really was. Ethan chose a quiet table near the window instead of requesting anything special. He encouraged Ava to order whatever she liked, but she studied the menu far longer than necessary, carefully choosing one of the least expensive meals. Ethan noticed without mentioning it. When the server returned, he calmly added a bowl of hot soup, fresh bread, and warm tea to the order before requesting. The check remained with him. During dinner, Ethan asked surprisingly ordinary questions. What neighborhood did she live in? What kind of work did she enjoy? What had she wanted to become when she was younger? He never asked how much money she had lost or why her boyfriend had abandoned her. Ava found herself relaxing with each passing minute because she realized Ethan listened far more than he spoke. She admitted that she worked 2 jobs because she hoped to build a stable future. She confessed that she had believed this trip would strengthen her relationship instead of ending it. Then she quietly smiled at the untouched tea beside her. "I guess I trusted the wrong person." Ethan remained silent for a moment before answering. Trust is never a mistake. Giving it to the wrong person is simply something life teaches us to recognize. Those words settled gently between them. They did not erase the hurt she carried, but they somehow made it feel lighter. After dinner, Ethan called a nearby boutique hotel he trusted and arranged a room for the night. When Ava immediately protested that she could not afford it, he calmly replied, "Consider it one traveler helping another." Outside, the cool Chicago air greeted them as they walked toward a waiting sedan parked beneath the terminal lights. Ethan placed her backpack carefully inside before opening the passenger door with quiet courtesy. As the city lights reflected across the rain-damp pavement and the airport slowly disappeared behind them, Ava looked through the window wondering why a complete stranger had shown her more respect in one evening than the man she had loved had shown her in months. While Ethan drove through the silent streets realizing that sometimes the most important journeys began with nothing more than choosing not to walk past someone who believed the world had already forgotten them. The boutique hotel stood only 15 minutes from the airport, tucked beside the Chicago River where the city lights shimmered across the calm water despite the late hour. Ethan parked beneath the covered entrance while a night concierge greeted them with quiet professionalism. Without mentioning his influence or Requesting special treatment, Ethan completed the reservation under Ava's name and handed her the room key. You should get some rest, he said. Tomorrow will feel different after a few hours of sleep. Ava accepted the key with both hands, still struggling to understand why someone she had met less than 2 hours earlier continued treating her with such quiet respect. I do not know how I will ever repay you, she admitted softly. Ethan smiled almost imperceptibly. By accepting kindness when you need it. One day you may have the chance to offer it to someone else. Those simple words stayed with Ava long after the elevator doors closed behind her. The room was modest but elegant, with warm lighting, fresh linens, and a wide window overlooking the sleeping city. She placed her backpack on the bed and noticed something she had almost forgotten she possessed. Peace. For the first time since arriving at the airport, she no longer felt trapped by uncertainty. Meanwhile, Ethan returned to his car and drove toward a quiet penthouse overlooking downtown Chicago. His evening had unfolded very differently from what he had planned. He should have been reviewing reports before an executive meeting scheduled for the following morning, yet his thoughts remained fixed on the young woman sitting alone beneath the departure board. During his years of building companies, he had learned that systems rarely failed all at once. Small acts of neglect accumulated until someone eventually paid the price. Ava's story did not sound like simple misfortune. Something about the airline's response troubled him. She had described waiting for assistance, searching for information, and receiving little more than polite apologies before being left with no meaningful options. Ethan entered his private study shortly after 2 o'clock in the morning and quietly opened his laptop. Instead of reading financial reports, he reviewed the operational summary from the airport. Delayed flights, customer service staffing levels, passenger assistance records, overnight escalation reports. Everything appeared technically compliant, yet something still felt incomplete. He made a brief note requesting a full executive review of passenger support procedures at the first meeting the next morning. He offered no explanation, only a simple instruction marked urgent. Before closing the computer, Ethan paused for a moment. He realized he had never asked Ava for her last name, nor had she asked what he did for a living. Somehow, the absence of those details had made the evening feel more genuine. There had been no titles between them, no assumptions, no expectations. Only one traveler helping another. Across the city, Ava stood beside the hotel window watching the first hint of dawn brighten the horizon. Her phone rested on the bedside table, finally charging after hours without power. Several missed calls and messages from Ryan began appearing on the screen, each arriving one after another. She read the first few without emotion before quietly placing the phone face down. For the first time since everything had fallen apart, she no longer felt any urgency to answer. Outside, airplanes continued tracing silent paths across the brightening sky, while a new morning prepared to reveal a truth neither she nor Ryan could possibly imagine. The quiet stranger who had offered her dinner, safety, and dignity was not simply another passenger passing through the airport. By the end of the day, the entire airline would stand when he entered the room. The following morning, sunlight poured through the towering glass walls of the airline's global headquarters overlooking downtown Chicago. Executives arrived carrying tablets, reports, and steaming cups of coffee, exchanging quiet greetings before taking their seats around a polished conference table that stretched nearly the length of the room. No one knew why an emergency meeting had been called with less than 8 hours' notice. Regional directors from customer service, airport operations, and passenger relations reviewed their notes one final time, expecting another discussion about quarterly performance or seasonal travel forecasts. The room fell completely silent the moment the doors opened. Ethan Park entered alone, dressed in the same charcoal suit he had worn the previous evening, his calm expression revealing nothing. Every executive immediately rose to their feet. No one spoke until he reached the head of the table. Ethan acknowledged them with a slight nod before taking his seat. "Please sit," he said evenly. Without wasting a single minute, the large display screens illuminated with airport activity reports from the previous night. Flight delays, customer assistance logs, passenger complaint summaries. Ethan studied each page without emotion. "Tell me," he began quietly, "what is our responsibility when a passenger is left without transportation, communication, or safe accommodations because circumstances place them in a vulnerable position?" The room remained silent for several seconds before the Vice President of Customer Experience answered confidently. Our policies require employees to provide available information and appropriate assistance whenever possible. Ethan looked directly at him. Whenever possible. He repeated the phrase slowly. Interesting choice of words. He pressed a button on the conference table, and security footage from Terminal 5 appeared on the screen. Executives watched travelers moving through the nearly empty concourse until the recording focused on Ava sitting alone beneath the departure board. Minute after minute passed as employees walked nearby, while she remained stranded with no practical solution. No one in the room realized Ethan himself would soon appear in the video. The recording continued until his image entered the frame, approaching Ava and offering help. Several executives exchanged confused glances. One finally whispered, "That is you." Ethan simply nodded. "Yes." Another long silence settled across the conference room. Last night, Ethan continued, "I learned more about our passenger experience by walking through one terminal than I have from hundreds of performance reports." He turned toward the head of airport operations. "How many employees documented this passenger situation?" The executive nervously reviewed his tablet before answering. "According to the overnight reports, none." Ethan did not raise his voice. He did not criticize anyone personally. His disappointment alone filled the room with greater weight than anger ever could. "Then our reports are incomplete," he said calmly. "Policies do not comfort frightened travelers. Procedures do not rebuild trust. People do." He instructed the leadership team to conduct an immediate review of every passenger assistance protocol across the airline, ensuring that no traveler facing similar circumstances would ever be left without meaningful support again. Before the meeting concluded, Ethan made one final request. "Locate Ava Brooks," he said. "Invite her here this afternoon. Tell her we would like to personally hear about her experience." Across the city, Ava had just finished breakfast in the quiet hotel dining room when the front desk informed her that someone from the airline had called asking if she would be willing to attend a meeting at headquarters later that day. Confused but curious, she agreed, never imagining that the polite stranger who had quietly restored her hope the night before was about to reveal a truth capable of changing the course of her life forever. The airline headquarters rose above the Chicago skyline, like a wall of glass reflecting the clear afternoon sun. Ava stood in the spacious lobby clutching the visitor badge the receptionist had handed her only moments earlier. Everything around her felt far removed from the uncertainty of the previous night. Employees crossed the marble floor with quiet confidence. Digital displays welcomed international visitors, and elegant artwork decorated the walls with understated sophistication. A courteous assistant approached and offered a warm smile. "Miss Brooks, thank you for coming. Someone will meet you shortly." Ava nodded politely, still wondering why a company of this size wanted to hear from someone like her. She expected a customer service representative, perhaps even a department manager. Instead, the elevator doors opened, and every nearby employee immediately straightened their posture. Conversation stopped. Executives who had been walking through the lobby stepped aside with unmistakable respect. Ava turned toward the elevator just as the familiar figure from the airport stepped into the room. Ethan wore the same composed expression she remembered, though this time several senior executives followed a respectful distance behind him. For a brief moment, Ava simply stared in disbelief. Ethan smiled gently, exactly as he had the night before. "Good afternoon, Ava." Before she could answer, the executives surrounding him greeted him almost in unison. "Good afternoon, Mr. Park." The words echoed through the lobby with quiet precision. Ava slowly looked from Ethan to the leadership team standing beside him, then back again. The realization settled over her in complete silence. The stranger who had bought her dinner, arranged her hotel room, and driven her safely through the city had never been an ordinary traveler. He was the man leading the entire company. Ethan noticed the surprise on her face and spoke with the same calm voice she had come to recognize. "I did not tell you who I was because last night was never about my position." He gestured toward a nearby conference room overlooking the city. "Would you join us?" Ava followed him inside, still trying to process everything she had just witnessed. Around the polished conference table sat the airline's senior leadership team, each waiting quietly as Ethan invited Ava to take the chair beside him rather than across from him. That single gesture surprised everyone in the room. Ethan turned toward the executives. Yesterday, each of you reviewed reports describing passenger satisfaction, operational efficiency, and service standards. Today I would like you to listen to someone whose experience never appeared in those reports. He looked at Ava with quiet encouragement. Tell us only what happened. Nothing more. Ava folded her hands together before speaking. She never criticized individual employees. She never demanded compensation. She simply described what it felt like to stand in a crowded airport without transportation, without a working phone, without clear guidance, and without knowing where she would safely spend the night. She explained that the hardest part had not been missing a flight. It had been believing that no one noticed she needed help. As she finished, the room remained completely silent. Several executives lowered their eyes. Others quietly closed their laptops without taking another note. Ethan finally spoke. Statistics measure performance. Stories reveal responsibility. He then announced that every passenger assistance procedure across the airline would be redesigned beginning that very day, ensuring that compassion would become just as important as operational efficiency. Ava realized she had unknowingly changed an entire system simply by telling the truth, while Ethan understood that the most valuable lesson he had learned in years had begun beside a lonely airport gate, where one forgotten traveler had reminded him what leadership was truly meant to protect. When the meeting concluded, the executives quietly filed out of the conference room, carrying far more than updated policy notes. Many paused before leaving to thank Ava personally, not because she had demanded change, but because she had reminded them why their work mattered in the first place. Within minutes, teams across the headquarters began drafting new procedures that would guarantee overnight accommodations, emergency phone charging stations, transportation assistance, and dedicated support for passengers left without safe options. Ethan remained by the window overlooking the Chicago skyline until only he and Ava were left in the room. The silence between them felt comfortable rather than awkward. Finally, Ethan turned toward her with the same calm expression she had first seen beneath the airport departure board. "Thank you for coming today," he said. "You gave this company something more valuable than a complaint. You gave us the opportunity to become better." Ava smiled softly. "I did not expect any of this. I only answered your questions honestly." Ethan nodded. Honesty is surprisingly rare when people believe they have nothing to gain from it. Before either of them could continue, a light knock interrupted the conversation. Ethan's assistant stepped inside carrying a visitor request. "Mr. Park, there is someone downstairs insisting on speaking with Miss Brooks." Security asked whether they should allow him inside. Ethan glanced toward Ava, who quietly accepted the paper. The name printed across the top immediately caught her attention. Ryan Mitchell. She lowered the page without changing her expression. Apparently, the missed calls and unanswered messages had finally led him here. Ethan spoke calmly. "The decision is yours." Ava stood silently for several moments before answering. "I will see him. I think we both deserve a proper ending." A few minutes later, Ryan entered a private reception room clearly expecting to find the frightened woman he had left behind the previous evening. Instead, he stopped in surprise as Ava stood confidently beside the floor-to-ceiling windows, her posture calm and composed. "Ava," he began quickly, "I have been trying to explain everything. My phone died after I landed. I thought you would catch the next flight. Everything just happened so fast." Ava listened without interrupting. She had imagined this conversation many times during the sleepless hours at the airport, but now his excuses sounded strangely distant. They no longer carried the power they once had. Ryan took another step forward. "Please, let me make this right. We can still fix everything." Before Ava could answer, the conference room door quietly opened. Ethan entered, accompanied only by his assistant. Ryan instinctively turned toward him, assuming he was another executive. Then his eyes widened as he recognized the face displayed on framed corporate photographs throughout the building. His expression shifted from confusion to astonishment. Ethan greeted him politely without hostility. "Good afternoon." Ryan quickly straightened his jacket, suddenly aware of where he was standing. Ethan did not question him or criticize his choices. Instead, he looked toward Ava and allowed her complete control of the moment. She met Ryan's eyes with quiet confidence. "Last night, I believed being left behind was the worst thing that could happen to me," she said gently. "Today I understand it was the moment that showed me who truly valued me." Ryan lowered his gaze, unable to answer. Ava continued with kindness rather than anger. I hope you find whatever you are looking for, but it is no longer beside me. She offered him a sincere smile before turning away. As Ryan quietly walked toward the exit, Ethan remained where he was, saying nothing. He understood that the greatest victories rarely came from defeating another person. Sometimes they came from watching someone rediscover the dignity they had carried within themselves all along. As the afternoon sunlight slowly settled across the Chicago skyline, the headquarters that had been filled with urgent meetings only hours earlier grew unexpectedly peaceful. Employees returned to their offices carrying new ideas instead of old assumptions, and conversations throughout the building no longer centered on quarterly numbers alone. They spoke about responsibility, compassion, and the quiet reminder that every passenger carried a story no report could fully capture. Ethan stood beside the panoramic windows of his office, watching airplanes rise gracefully into the clear blue sky. Each departure represented thousands of people trusting strangers to carry them safely toward the next chapter of their lives. For years, he had believed leadership meant protecting an organization from failure. Now he understood it also meant protecting people from feeling invisible. A gentle knock sounded at the open office door. Ava stood there holding the visitor badge she no longer needed. I wanted to return this before I left, she said with a warm smile. Ethan accepted the badge but placed it quietly on his desk instead of putting it away. You know, he said thoughtfully, there are moments that change an entire company, and they rarely begin inside boardrooms. Ava laughed softly. I never imagined missing a flight could do that. Ethan smiled in return. Neither did I. He then handed her a small envelope bearing the airline's logo. Ava looked at it with quiet curiosity before opening it. Inside was a handwritten letter thanking her for helping improve the future experience of every passenger, along with a lifetime travel pass that could be used whenever she wished. At the bottom of the page, Ethan had written only one sentence in his own handwriting. No journey should begin with fear. Ava looked up with genuine surprise. This is far too generous. Ethan gently shook his head. It is not a reward. It is a reminder that you should never stop exploring the world because someone else failed to appreciate your worth. For several quiet seconds, neither of them spoke. The city stretched endlessly beyond the glass, while sunlight reflected from aircraft climbing into the afternoon sky. Finally, Ava extended her hand. Ethan accepted it with quiet respect. There were no dramatic promises, no declarations, and no attempt to define what the future might become. Some relationships were stronger when they began with mutual admiration rather than expectation. As Ava prepared to leave, Ethan walked with her to the lobby instead of asking an assistant to escort her. Employees who passed by greeted both of them with warm smiles, sensing that something meaningful had happened even if they did not know every detail. Outside the building, a gentle breeze carried the sounds of the city through the streets below. Ava paused before stepping onto the sidewalk and looked back one final time. Less than 24 hours earlier, she had believed her life had fallen apart beside an airport gate. Now she realized that being left behind had simply created space for something far greater to find her. Ethan watched as she walked confidently toward her future, no longer carrying the weight of rejection, but the quiet strength of someone who had rediscovered her own value. He understood that true power was never measured by the companies a person owned or the influence they commanded. It was measured by the lives they chose to lift when no one else was paying attention. And on that ordinary afternoon in Chicago, two strangers walked away from one another carrying the same lesson in their hearts. Respect cannot be demanded, purchased, or borrowed. It is earned through kindness, protected by integrity, and remembered long after every journey has reached its destination.